The first sign that something was wrong wasn't the radar blip. It was the silence. Out on the dark, glassy waters of the Strait of Hormuz, where the sea usually hummed with the distant thrum of engines and the quiet chatter of global trade, everything felt suspended. Lieutenant Commander Jake Mercer stood on the bridge of the USS Arlington, his fingers resting lightly on the console, eyes fixed on the horizon where faint shapes moved against the early dawn. "Confirm that again," he said quietly, his voice steady but tight. "Multiple large vessels," the radar operator replied, swallowing. "Unidentified formation, now confirmed as Chinese. Flagged tankers. They're entering the strait." Jake exhaled slowly. This wasn't routine traffic. Not like this, not in formation, and not at this hour. Far across the water, aboard one of those tankers, Captain Liu Wen stood alone near the bow, his coat fluttering in the wind. The sea air carried a bitter chill, but it was nothing compared to the weight pressing against his chest. He had spent 25 years at sea. He had seen storms rip ships apart and pirates circle like sharks. But this quiet, deliberate crossing, felt different, political, dangerous, unpredictable. He reached into his pocket and unfolded a small photograph. His daughter, May, smiling under a bright red lantern. She was 10 now. He had missed her last 3 birthdays. "Just one more voyage," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he believed it anymore. Back on the Arlington, Jake's mind raced through protocols, scenarios, worst-case outcomes. He had grown up in a small coastal town in Maine, the son of a fisherman who believed the ocean was both a provider and a judge. "The sea doesn't care who you are," his father used to say, "but it'll show you who you really are." Jake had joined the Navy to prove something. To himself, maybe to a father who rarely said he was proud. Years later, standing on a warship in one of the world's most volatile choke points, he wondered if he'd finally found that answer, or if he was about to lose it. "Sir," the communications officer interrupted, "Pentagon is requesting real-time updates. They want to know intent." Jake nodded. "Tell them we're observing, no aggressive posture, not yet, not yet." That phrase lingered in the air like a warning. Thousands of miles away, in a dimly lit newsroom in Dubai, journalist Aisha Rahman leaned over her desk, eyes glued to a live satellite feed. Her editor paced behind her, phone pressed to his ear. "This is it," he said when he hung up. "Major movement in the Strait. U.S. Navy is responding." Aisha's fingers hovered over her keyboard. She had built her career chasing stories, exactly like this stories, where geopolitics turned into human consequences. But she also knew the cost. Her younger brother had once asked her, "Why do you always cover dangerous things?" She had smiled then, but her answer had been honest. "Because people deserve to know what's really happening." And now, watching the ships inch closer on her screen, she felt a familiar knot in her stomach. Because sometimes knowing came with a price. Back at sea, the distance between the two sides shrank with every passing minute. "Open a channel," Jake ordered. Static crackled before a voice came through, calm, measured, unmistakably controlled. "This is Captain Liu Wen of the tanker Hai Sheng. We are conducting lawful transit. We intend no provocation." Jake leaned toward the microphone. "This is Lieutenant Commander Jake Mercer of the United States Navy. Your formation is irregular. State your purpose clearly." There was a pause. "Not long, but long enough to feel heavy. Our purpose," Liu replied, "is to deliver what we were sent to deliver. Nothing more." Jake's jaw tightened. "And nothing less." Another pause. "Nothing less," Liu confirmed. On Liu's ship, the crew worked quietly, tension evident in every movement. Among them was Chen Wai, a young engineer on his first major voyage. He had grown up in a small inland town, far from the sea, dreaming of adventure. But this wasn't the adventure he had imagined. "Captain," Chen said hesitantly, "are we safe?" Liu looked at him, really looked at him. The fear in his eyes, the uncertainty. "Safety," Liu said slowly, "is not something the sea guarantees. but we will do everything we can to return home. Chen nodded, though his hand still trembled. Back on the Arlington, a new complication emerged, sir. The radar operator said, voice rising slightly, we're picking up fast. Moving vessels approaching from the west, smaller boats, possibly armed. Jake's heart sank. This was the nightmare scenario, a third party entering the equation. In these waters, it didn't take much to ignite chaos. Identify them, no clear markings, speed suggests non-state actors, pirates, militants, something worse. Jake grabbed the microphone again. Captain Liu, you have unidentified vessels approaching your position. Recommend immediate caution. On the tanker, Liu's grip tightened around the railing. I see them, he said quietly. The small boats cut through the water like blades, their engines roaring, closing the distance rapidly. Chen's voice shook. Captain, what do we do? Liu's mind raced. He had orders, he had a mission, but he also had lives, dozens of them, depending on his decisions. We hold course, he said at first, almost reflexively. Then he looked again at the approaching boats. At the fear spreading across his crew, and something shifted. Reduce speed. He ordered suddenly, signal all ships to tighten formation. Captain, Chen asked, surprised. We are not here to fight, Liu said. We are here to survive. Back on the Arlington, Jake made his choice just as quickly. All units, he said firmly. We are moving to intercept those small vessels. Defensive posture only. No escalation unless necessary. The ship surged forward, cutting through the water with purpose. Aisha watched it all unfold on her screen, her breath catching as the gap between forces shrank. This could turn into something very bad, she murmured, recording her notes, or something else. The small boats were now dangerously close. One of them fired a warning shot into the air. The crack echoed across the water. Chen flinched. They're shooting. Stay calm. Liu shouted. Do not respond, but fear is a powerful thing. On another tanker, a crew member panicked, reaching for a flare gun. No, Liu yelled over the radio, hold your fire, but it was too late. The flare shot into the sky, a streak of red against the pale morning light. For a split second, everything froze. Then the situation teetered on the edge of disaster. On the Arlington, alarms blared. Sir, we have a launch from the tanker. Jake's pulse spiked. Identify. Flare. Just a flare. He exhaled sharply. Stand down weapons, do not engage. The small boats hesitated, their approach slowing as the U.S. Navy vessels closed in, positioning themselves between the tankers and the incoming threat. A silent message, not today. The tension stretched unbearably, seconds feeling like minutes. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, the small boats began to turn away. One by one, they peeled off, disappearing back into the horizon. A collective breath seemed to release across the water. On Liu's ship, Chen sank to the deck, his legs giving out. We're okay, he asked. Liu nodded, though his voice was quiet. For now, back on the Arlington, Jake leaned back, the adrenaline still coursing through him. Good call, sir, one of his officers said. Jake didn't respond immediately. His eyes remained on the distant tankers. It wasn't just us, he said finally. They chose not to escalate too. Thousands of miles away, Aisha stopped typing. This wasn't the story she had expected. She had prepared for conflict, for headlines filled with fear. Instead, she saw something else, restraint. Humanity, choice. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Liu stood on the deck once more. He pulled out the photograph of his daughter again. Today, he said softly, we came close to losing everything, but they hadn't. On the Arlington, Jake wrote his report, his words careful, precise, but his thoughts drifting. He thought about his father, about the ocean, about what it meant to stand on the edge of conflict and choose not to step over. In Dubai, Aisha finished her article with a single line that stayed with her long after she hit publish. In a place where the world often expects confrontation, today, restraint became the most powerful act of all. because in the end it wasn't the ships or the weapons or the politics that defined that day. It was the people, a captain who chose caution over pride, a commander who chose protection over aggression, a young sailor who faced fear and endured, and a journalist who told the story, not of war, but of the moment it was avoided. The Strait of Hormuz returned to its familiar rhythm by nightfall, ships passing quietly under a sky full of stars. But for those who had been there, the silence would never feel quite the same again, because they had seen how close the world could come to breaking and how, sometimes, it doesn't.